Hi everyone, welcome to CTL's Education Professional Development Series. My name is Stephanie Shea, I'm the Marketing Manager here at CTL, and today I'm joined by Amy Rojas, Sales Partner in Operations Support. She'll be helping out with our Q&A section later. If you're not familiar with CTL, we've been headquartered in Portland, Oregon, and we provide IT solutions to education and government. We've been doing it for over 26 years. We are a Google for Education partner, and we specialize in rugged CTL Chromebooks, laptops, convertibles, 2-in-1s, and tablets that are designed specifically for K-12 education. Over the last 3 years, we've been working with Google to introduce a line of Chromebooks that have been recommended by PC Magazine as the best choice for Chromebooks in education. Today's webinar is Increasing Student Engagement and Improving Assessment with G Suite, which was formerly called Google Apps for Education. And our presenter today is Dani Kennis. She is a technology coach and Google certified educator and a special education social studies teacher. But before we get started with that, I just want to go over the attendee interface with everyone so you know how to participate in today's event. You should be seeing something that looks like this on your own computer or desktop in the upper right corner. You're listening in using your computer speaker system by default. If you prefer to join over the phone, you can just select telephone in the audio pane and the dial-in information will be displayed. You can also type in questions into the questions pane of the control panel during the presentation. They will be addressed in the Q&A session at the end. However, you know, Dani may choose to stop in her presentation and see if anyone has questions. So just feel free to be typing them in throughout the presentation. Before we get going, I'm going to do a brief poll for our audience today. We're curious what your experience level with G Suite for Education. So I'll give everybody just a moment to fill that out. Looks like almost everybody's voted. A few more seconds to make sure. Okay, so we've got a mixed bag. Let me share these results. The good news is everybody has some experience. It looks like the majority have a lot of experience and even some expert levels, so I think this will be really great for Dani to know, and she's got a lot of information today that I think even when you've been working, you know, for a long time, that you're going to learn some new things today. So let me close this out, and I think we're ready to get going. Let me introduce Dani. Sorry about this. She is a technology coach and Google certified educator and a special education social studies teacher. And she's going to share how G Suite for Education can be used for diagnostic assessment, as well as some interactive learning activities that can really increase student engagement in the classroom. So I'd like to welcome Dani. Hold on one moment. Dani, are you here?
Hi, Steph. Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, you sound good. I'm going to get your slides up.
Awesome.
Yes, we're excited for today's presentation.
I'm really excited too, and it looks like we have a good crowd and kind of a mixed bag of experience, so that's perfect.
Yes, indeed. Okay, is everybody seeing the blue increasing student engagement slides? It seems like we're in good shape.
Yep, I see it.
So I'm going to turn it over to you, Dani, and welcome and thank you for presenting today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Steph. So before I start, like Steph had mentioned, if anyone has questions throughout the webinar, please make sure that you ask, because I love getting questions and I love being able to help people, so don't hesitate to ask. So today we'll be talking about increasing student engagement and improving assessment with G Suite. or Google Apps. Just changed the name. So a little bit about me, and Steph, you can move on to the next slide. So I'm Danny Kennis. I teach in New York at a high school. I teach social studies and special education, and I'm also a technology coach in a one-to-one blended Chromebook classroom. So I teach world history to high school freshmen and sophomores. I'm about 30 minutes outside of New York City, and in my class, I'm lucky enough to have a Chromebook cart. I think a lot of this, a lot of what I'll talk about today works best if you are in a one-to-one setting, which I know isn't always possible, but it is definitely ideal. So actually that bottom link, and this whole presentation will be up on the CTL website, I believe. You can go from that link to, I guess, kind of a story or a series of blog entries about my one-to-one Chromebook journey. So from before I had Chromebooks to how I'm using them every day in my classroom now. So depending on kind of where you are in your Chromebook journey, that could be helpful to some of you, hopefully. Next slide, please. So when we're starting out with technology, oh, there might be some animations on some of these slides, Steph. I forgot to give you the heads up about that.
Yeah, I saw nothing, but now I understand. Thank you.
You could press it one more time. There's just one more little picture. So when we're starting off with technology, it's really important to know that it really helps teachers and all educators to connect with students. So one of these pictures, the top left, is a tweet from David Gurin, and I thought that this really spoke, or not a quote from him, but a tweet from him, and it spoke really well to how students react to when you use technology. So teachers will not be replaced by technology, but teachers who don't use technology will be replaced by those who do. It just, again, speaks to the importance of really engaging and motivating your students on a level that they understand, and today's students, a lot of them are using technology, and they're using them to connect with each other in and out of the classroom. And then obviously that bottom picture is just kind of a joke. Why the heck are you reading us a book? Don't you have an iPad, lady? I saw that and I just thought it was kind of cute. So the gist here is that to create kind of a student-centered learning environment, which is the goal as we kind of move forward in tearing down the four walls of our classroom, technology is a really great way to do that because it allows students an opportunity to share work with each other as well as authentic audiences that are not just us, not just their teachers, not just their peers, not just the classroom next door. Students get really excited to be able to share and create for an audience that is more than just teachers and peers. Next slide, please. So before we begin, what does student engagement look like? And it looks different in every single classroom, depending on what grade level you teach, what subject you teach, but picture for 1 second a classroom of students that are really engaged, really excited about what they're learning. And then picture a classroom of students who are not engaged. Think about the differences between those two. Let's go to the next slide. And for me, this is student engagement versus student non-engagement. So that top picture is a group of students who are clearly bored, they're not interested, they're not in charge of their own learning. And so the bottom picture, some might say that that's also not student engagement. For me, in my classroom, those are groups of students that are engaged. Those are kids who are connecting, and while they have a screen in front of them, I know that, at least in my classroom, they are being productive and they're getting work done. And so it's important to remember that engagement does look and feel really different in every single classroom. The other thing to note is that some classes might be physically set up differently than others. So while one classroom has desks in rows, another could be in small groups or clusters. And so again, just depending on what you teach and your classroom management style, things are going to look very different. But thanks to G Suite, there's a lot of tools and different apps that can help shift the current role of a teacher into the role of kind of a coach, and then guiding students to do technology-infused projects that really make students tap into their creativity and helps them to not be afraid to take a risk or fail or learn from their mistakes. A lot of teachers that I speak to, I get this question almost every time we do a webinar or every time I do a presentation. A lot of teachers are really concerned about what classroom management looks like in a setting where students are engaged and being assessed using technology. But again, that's kind of up to every individual teacher. I think personally, if you set high expectations and clear boundaries from the very beginning of the year, classroom management hopefully kind of just falls into place. And we can talk about that more if anyone has any other questions about that. Next slide, please. So for me, students are engaged when they're interested, challenged, satisfied by the work, persistent in the work, and committed to the work. So student engagement is an active process where teachers have to create opportunities for students that are different from the typical worksheet or lecture format. And in my experiences, I've really found that students are so much more excited about the work, and their sense of pride really just skyrockets when they're given unique opportunities to display their knowledge and then recreate their understanding of information. Next slide, please. So the two main questions we're going to look at today are how can we use Google Apps to increase student engagement. That's our first kind of overarching question. And then we'll talk about how Google Apps are going to be used to assess student learning. And so all of the things that we'll talk about today are collaborative and student-centered and focused on putting students into the driver's seat to direct their own learning and their own understanding. So again, how can we use Google Apps to increase student engagement? And then next slide, how can Google Apps be used to assess learning? And the reason that these are the two questions that are kind of going to drive us today is because I've found that in going one-to-one, a lot of this kind of overlaps in terms of engagement and assessment. And when you're talking about Google Suite and Google Tools, we're going to kind of lump them together and discuss them as one, with the understanding that, of course, you can use each tool in a lot of different ways. And just one more thing. All of these ideas that we'll talk about are always a work in progress. So these are things that I've tried that have worked, but if you have any other tools or projects or ideas that you feel that you've done that have worked really well with kids, please reach out to me, because I'm always looking for different ways to engage my students and then ways to improve any of the things that I'm already doing. Next slide, please. So specifically within the assessment realm, before we kind of dive in, I just wanted to point out that there are three different types of assessment that a lot of what we'll talk about will kind of fall under the umbrella of. So we have diagnostic assessment, which happens before the learning. So if we kind of think of this as like a KWL chart, diagnostic assessment at the beginning, formative assessment is during the learning, and then summative assessment at the end of the learning or after learning has happened. So the assessments that we'll talk about can cover any three of those types of assessments. Next slide, please, and we'll jump right into the many different ideas that we'll be talking about today. So first is flipped instruction. This is a blended learning approach where students are introduced to content at home and they practice or ask questions on the content at school. If you've heard of flipped learning, then obviously this is nothing new to you, but if you have not heard of it, this probably sounds kind of scary and a little bit weird. So there's many different opinions on flipped learning and a lot of ways to conduct this method of teaching. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my own personal experiences and what's worked best with me. So the role of the student and the teacher are kind of reversed in flipped instruction. So the old school kind of classroom model of lecturing and note-taking becomes the work that's done at home, so that the class time can be used for that deeper dive into the learning and the questions or really group projects. In my own experience, again, what I'll do is I'll pre-record videos that are 10 minutes or less to do that direct instruction kind of like lecture portion of my lesson. And then the video is uploaded to my YouTube channel. Students go home and watch the video. They can take notes, and usually what I'll do, because I teach special ed, is I'll create a set of guided notes for my students to use as I go through the lecture. And so with those guided notes, and then also I use a Google form, that's how I'm kind of assessing and making sure that my students are following along with what I'm talking about in the lecture. And that's how they're held accountable for doing the work. So they'll watch the video, they'll fill in the guided notes, and they'll fill out a Google form. And the Google form is usually like 2 or 3 questions just to make sure they watched. And then the next day when they come into school, we start by reviewing what they saw and what they heard in the video. So usually what I'll do is tell them that on a Post-it, I want them to write down 2 things they learned and then 1 question that they had on the material before we dig deeper or do a project, because I want to make sure that I'm clarifying any misconceptions or misunderstandings that they might have and really taking that time to answer the questions since they were presented the material on their own. So eventually what happens when you've flipped a handful of lessons and students kind of get the hang of the method that you're going to use and this new model of learning and teaching, it becomes kind of seamless, and class time is really spent kind of doing projects or any kind of collaborative learning activity that really push that deeper understanding and that student-driven learning. But it's important to note that flipped instruction doesn't have to just be teacher-led. What I've done is actually had my students create some flipped videos, which was an awesome experience to have them interpret and then translate the information into their own way and make videos for each other, and that really kind of fosters like that ownership of content and gets the kids very excited to kind of make videos for each other. And the other thing that I've kind of noticed is it really kind of changed the climate and the culture of my classroom in that when I'd be filming these videos, it was after school, so sometimes I was eating a snack, or sometimes, like, you know, my hair was messed up, or I would flub up a line and I just didn't go back and edit it, and the kids would come in the next day like laughing about it, and it kind of gave us all something to bond over, as silly as that might sound, but I really loved it and they loved it, and it was kind of just like a really nice learning experience for that first time that I had tried it. And so the other piece of advice I'd offer is when you're doing flipped instruction, if you're kind of just trying to do it for the first time, I would use a slow release model. And by that I just mean to really explicitly explain to your students what flipped instruction is, why you're doing it, and I would always start with a non-school related example. So make a video on something that has nothing to do with school so that you know that you can get that buy-in and allow your kids to get used to that format. And I think that, again, accountability is another really big piece. So that's why I think that the Google form kind of going along with the lecture is a really important piece so that you can kind of make sure that you're holding the kids accountable and so that they know that they're not just sitting there watching a video for no reason at all. Next slide, please. So next we have Mystery Skype or Google Hangout. This is awesome. I really love this idea a lot. I can see this working so well with a group of younger students. So it's basically an education game, and I'll dive into what it really is in a second, but I think that it's important to kind of start with our why. Like, why are we talking about this? So as connected educators, hopefully a lot of you that are tuning in are on Twitter, and you know other educators from around the world, and we can really harness that power, and we're given a very unique opportunity to collaborate with each other when we are connected educators. So Mystery Skype is one way to kind of do that. And so what it is basically you play a game with another classroom from wherever. You have to set it up ahead of time and kind of plan with the teacher for when you're going to do this and how this is going to happen. Tell the kids exactly what you're doing first so that they're not, you know, taken by surprise when they see a video of a classroom of another student's on the screen and have no idea what's going on. But the whole aim of Mystery Skype is to guess the location, like the geographic location of where the other classroom is, by going back and forth and asking each other questions. So I can see this working really well in a social studies class that's focusing on geography, but I definitely think it can be used in other academic areas also if you're creative. And so, again, 2 classes, kind of Skype or Google Hangout, or do some kind of video FaceTime type of thing with one another. They exchange questions, they go back and forth until one or the other is able to guess where they are. And so I can see this integrating into a lesson really well for younger students who are studying about a specific place, or older students who are studying the characteristics of a government or social class system. And so I think the power here is that, again, it's student driven. The students are teaching each other about geography or politics or government in a really fun and interactive way rather than the teacher being the one leading the learning. And it's also really cute to see how excited the students get when they see what other students look like and what other classrooms look like, and when they're investigating their surroundings. So this is kind of like a field trip without having to get on a bus, sort of. And we'll actually talk about even more of a field trip experience next if we go to the next slide. There's a lot of animation on this next slide, just so you know, Steph. So Google Expeditions. This is awesome. It's a virtual reality field trip to places that a school bus can't go. And so basically Expeditions is a collection of linked virtual reality content and the materials that go with it that can be used with your existing curriculum. So this is not part of G Suite. I have to say that, but it was too awesome not to include here. So Expeditions has been one of the most awesome tools and learning experiences I've ever introduced to my students. I will give a warning that there's a cost associated with it because each student does need a device, and then there's kind of other pieces that go with it that I'll get into in a minute. But with that said, every time I've used Expeditions with a class, it's always been so rewarding, and the level of engagement is just like unparalleled when I do Expeditions. So how it works. You basically use a virtual reality headset and an app that goes with it, the Expeditions app, that allows a teacher to lead a group of students through a virtual reality field trip. Teachers can search through a tablet, so while the students are on devices and they have their little headsets up to their eyes, the teacher is on a tablet with preloaded expeditions. So they're already made, they're already set up, you just choose which one you want to go on. And they're basically virtual reality panoramas of 360 photospheres and 3D images and video, and I believe that they have sound now. So the teacher picks the expedition that they want to take their students on, they press start, and the expedition begins, and it's kind of as simple as that. So the way that I make it more of an immersive experience is, this is a little bit cheesy, but Steph, you can press one more time because there's a little passport thing that I wanted to show. So the way that I kind of got my students to buy into this a little bit more, and I teach high school, is I made them kind of like fake passports, and it had their name on it and their picture on it and all their information on it, and then I left some lines for them to write down their observations, because I think the best and most successful lessons that I've done with Expeditions were really immersive. So along with these fake passports, which I know are kind of cheesy, but it helped the kids to feel like they were going on a field trip, which increased their engagement. I left them room to take notes and ask questions for every different location or slide that we saw. And what's awesome about Expeditions is for each different place that you go or each different slide that you see, Expeditions gives you a series of questions, either beginner, intermediate, or advanced. But I would suggest as the guide or the teacher leading the expedition to kind of make your own questions, because you want to make sure that it's specific enough for your own learning goals and cater to your specific objectives. So I've found that this works really well. It's kind of the closest thing to a field trip without actually going on a field trip. The feedback that I got from my students was wonderful. The one thing they said was they wish they could create the expeditions themselves. So I'm hoping that that will eventually be a possibility. But I know I said this, I always feel like I have to give the heads up again though. There is a cost associated with this, but I definitely have found that it's worth it because this is such an awesome and powerful way to really bring that learning to life and make it a tangible experience, especially for a lot of the abstract places and concepts you might talk about in all different classes. And it's not limited to just like social studies. There's a ton of different expeditions you can use that are cross-curricular. Next slide, please. Okay, so now we've got Google Calendar. I know this sounds so simple, but at my school, students are given a paper agenda book at the beginning of the year, and I find that a lot of them either lose it or just decide not to use it for whatever reason, or use their phone to keep track of assignments. So as a teacher of high school freshmen, I found that a lot of their executive functioning and just general organization skills are where a lot of them struggle. So they don't really understand the importance of keeping track of due dates, or they don't understand the correlation between getting good grades and being organized, so that has to be explicitly taught. So at the very beginning of the year, I introduced Google Calendar, and I suggest that the students download that app onto their phones. And now it's easier than ever to use Google Calendar because it is integrated with Google Classroom, which we'll get into in a little bit. So as long as the students' teachers are using Classroom and putting the assignments on there, they'll show up on a student's calendar. So when I'm introducing Calendar at the beginning of the year, I also talk about tasks and to-do lists, which there are little arrows pointing to, and why it's important to keep track of not only school-related tasks, but anything that they might need to stay on top of. So appointments or jobs or practice or meetings. And while this might sound like something that's so small to engage a student in a way that they understand on their phones and with Google Calendar, I've found makes a big difference in terms of the them getting their stuff done and them really understanding how important it is to keep track of things like that. Next slide, please. If you either don't like Google Calendar or you're looking for an alternative, Google Keep offers a little bit more, and so this is really awesome. So I always show my students, again, at the beginning of the year, Google Keep as either an alternative or a supplement to Google Calendar. So this allows you to store notes or lists or reminders, to-do lists. You're able to dictate to Google Keep. You can include pictures and share notes with other people. And so for the kids in my class that need assistance with organization and executive functioning or time management, I really love Google Keep. And I also love that they can use it from their phone, from their computer. It's just very minimalistic and simple to look at and very easy to use once they kind of get into that habit. Again, that link right there will bring you to another resource. So 7 features of Google Keep for you to teach with. I found that really helpful, so I just wanted to include that there. Next slide, please. Next is Google Draw, and this was kind of a more recent discovery for me. I really just kind of started playing around with it this year, but there is so much that you can do with Google Draw, especially for students that are kind of less linear and more visual, more creative. It's a really great option. So you can have the students create, or you can create and give to them graphic organizers, comic strips, posters. You can have them annotate images, create timelines, tutorials, infographics, word webs. There's tons and tons of things that you can do with Google Draw. So at the beginning of the year, you can have your students kind of jump in by doing an all about me drawing, just to get them a little bit more familiar with the tool. So you can have them practice with entering text and images and links that tell you all about them and where they're from or where you're from, where you work, your interests, hobbies. You can save it as either a JPEG or all different kinds of files. I have had students save things and upload it before to Padlet, if anyone is familiar. That's Padlet. It's an awesome website that's like a virtual bulletin board, basically. And so that's just one way that you can use Google Drawings. If we go to the next slide, I do a lot of training, and people ask all the time, how can math and science teachers use G Suite? So this is one way that you can definitely use G Suite, and I think Google Draw is perfect for having students really show what they know, or create or fill out graphic organizers or things that the teacher has made or things that they can make themselves. But it's just another way for them to kind of display what they know. Next slide, please. So now we're moving into Google Classroom, and there's a whole bunch of things that we can talk about with Google Classroom, but we'll kind of hone in first on kind of how it can help with collaboration. So overall, it's a really awesome tool to use for students to connect with you and each other, especially for those students that prefer learning using a device. So here are 3 ways that you can engage your students and facilitate discussions using Classroom. I've used it first as a discussion board to get students communicating with each other and collaborating. You can also use Google Plus. In Google Plus, you can use Google Communities, but I know a lot of schools do not have that open, unfortunately, so this is a really good alternative. Some students, a lot of my students, actually just feel more comfortable communicating by typing out their thoughts and responses first because they're sensitive or they are nervous to say what they want to say, and so this is a really good tool for those shy students that might be a little bit less confident. And it also allows teachers to give really immediate feedback, which is nice. So I'll ask a question like, summarize what you read in this paragraph, or critique the argument of so-and-so, or what is your opinion of whatever. So starting them off with a question that they can then kind of like delve into the explanation of is a really good idea. The other thing I'll do is have students comment on each other's posts, which is really awesome because if you have them give constructive criticism or feedback to one another, that can be a really powerful experience for the students. So here's an example where I had students find a news article and they had to summarize it and then comment on each other's summaries, and so that was one way that we kind of had students discuss with one another if you didn't want to use an outside discussion board. You can also use it as a student blog, and I'll get into the blank doc in 1 second. So let's go on to the next slide. This is a trick that I also learned pretty recently, and I think that part of the beauty of Google Classroom is the ability to collaborate with students right away and have them collaborate with each other. I can't say that enough, and I know I say that a lot, but I do think that that's the biggest benefit of Google Classroom. So the way that assignments are specifically given out in terms of writing assignments used to be that the teacher would give directions, they would set a due date, and students would turn in their papers on that date with really not much room or opportunity for editing or revising or getting feedback. But all of that changes with Classroom. So you can now kind of work alongside with your students and see their thought process as they write and correct those mistakes kind of before they happen almost. So this makes it a lot easier to correct misunderstandings or guide students in the right direction if they're not really getting a concept. So how to do this? To start, if you give an assignment that requires students to create a file in Drive, so doc or slide or sheet, you want to make sure you do it in Classroom so that you can be working on that with them and giving feedback. So you're going to create an assignment with a blank doc attached, and what that does is it basically gives the doc a title, and then it also has a student's name in there. So it gives you viewing and commenting rights so that you can both work sort of side by side. And there's also the major advantage of the paperless workflow, which again is another huge thing for Classroom. And all this is opposed to students creating a doc on their own and then sharing it with you later. So you can see, again, their thought process as they're actually typing something out. And Classroom makes it really quick and easy to go back and forth in terms of editing rights and commenting, which is such a good experience and so valuable for students who are looking to improve in their writing skills. And I've also found that students tend to work a lot harder when they know that they're giving feedback and being supported along the way, and not just at the end when they have a finished product and end up feeling like it's a little bit too late to improve. So what I've started to do is actually started using a policy where I let students make up and edit their written work for as long as they'd like to until they get the grade that they want. And the reason I do this is because I really want to encourage them to ask questions and learn from their mistakes and grow as writers and students and make sure that they have those opportunities, because again, Classroom does make that so easy for us now. Next slide, please. So focusing strictly on assessment for a second. Classroom offers the teacher a few different options to create a question. And this question can be either short answer or multiple choice. You also have the option to allow students to reply to each other or to edit their answer or not. So all that is kind of outlined in that picture right there. So a lot of times I'll use the create a question feature as a do now or an exit ticket. I've used it before as kind of like a short quiz. And so depending on what the assessment is, dictates whether or not I'll allow students to communicate with each other or be able to edit their answers. Sometimes what I'll do is at the beginning and at the end of class I'll ask the same question just so a student can kind of go back and like reflect on what they've learned and how their answer has evolved, and that can be a really powerful experience too. Next slide, please. So within Create a Question, and this is pretty awesome, you have the option to use a Google form that is self-grading. If anyone is familiar with Flubaroo, it's basically exactly that, which used to be an add-on for Google Sheets. But in Google Forms, you just go to Settings and then Quizzes in order to set your options up. So students get immediate email feedback on how they did once you create an answer key for the quiz. And you can choose to have the quiz graded and send the quiz with either correct answers or not, so you can like send them an answer key if you want to. The animation on the right is kind of showing you the process of that self-grading that Forms does, which is a really big time saver where assessment is concerned, and the students love the immediate feedback. In Google Forms, just a few quick tips that took me a really long time to learn, and I wish someone had told me at the very beginning. So always give students a short answer question asking for their first and last name as well as their class period. It just makes it a lot easier to kind of collect the data that way. Always collect usernames. So if students have like email addresses associated with the school, I would always collect them just to be safe and make sure that it actually is connected with their account. And then grading multiple choice questions is a lot faster than if you were to give students short answer questions. So depending on what kind of data you're looking for or what kind of feedback you're looking to give might kind of dictate what sort of question or quiz you're going to give out to your students. Next slide, please. So also within Google Forms, at the very beginning of the year, one of the first things I do during the first week of school is I collect basic information from a lot of my students. So I'll ask them about their academic abilities, their interests, their hobbies, their previous experiences in school, their home life, technology they have available to them. And so I used to do all this on paper, but now I do it on a Google form where students can answer the questions that make for much more easy and streamlined way for me to get to know my students a little bit better. What I try to do, and it gets a little bit difficult if you have a ton of kids, but I'll try to kind of take notes or jot down a few important things that each student writes and then have a short conference with the kids just so they know that I read their answers and really value what they're saying. So it makes the student feel as if I'm interested and invested in them from the get-go, which again builds that rapport and builds that trust, which is so important when you are trying to engage and motivate your students using technology. Next slide, please. So moving on to Google Docs, there's a lot of different projects that or ideas for assessment or engagement that you can do here, and a lot of these are projects. And you can decide how long to give the students to work on this, if you want them to do them at home or in class. Again, that probably depends on whether you're one-to-one or not. But one thing I found works really well is a news report. And so with the news report, what I want to focus on is what's in red here. So within Google Docs, there's a lot of different templates that are available. And I've heard that this is either changing or going away soon. I'm not 100% sure, so it's definitely worth a look. But within templates, there are different layouts and ideas that you just have to make a copy of to kind of manipulate or change to suit your needs and your objectives in class. So one template that I use a lot is the template for a news report. I've done a lot of projects where there are major characters from novels that have died or historical figures are involved in a conspiracy, and I'll have the students make a claim and then argue for or against it by creating a news article, which is a really awesome opportunity to teach that there's bias in the media and a great opportunity for students to practice that writing and collaborating and then creating something that's just a little bit different than taking notes or just reading about an event. So to get to this template gallery in Google Docs, you're going to go to File, New, and then From Template. And you should be able to search by subject or grade. Then from there, there's even more specific parameters that you can kind of set it to. Next slide, please. So aside from news reports, some of the other templates that are available is I found one for an award. And that kind of made me think, oh, that could be a really awesome idea to present a historical figure with either an award or something that would call to their negativity or something bad that they had done. And so I kind of manipulated a template to make my own, and this was for either a hero or a villain, so Man of the Year or Most Wanted project. So students had to argue whether they thought a historical figure was a good guy or a bad guy, basically, which is kind of the same as having them write like an essay, for example, but instead of writing that essay, there was just that creative element in there, and they did have to do some writing, but giving them that opportunity to display their knowledge in a different way, I found works really well. So students in this particular project were told they'd have to decide if Julius Caesar was a hero or a villain. They had to make this poster. They had to kind of argue one way or the other based on research that they had done. And so I found that this was a really awesome way to get kids a little bit more excited about a topic that wasn't particularly like super thrilling, but they ended up doing a really great job. And that written justification for their choice kind of proves to me that they really understood the information and knew what they were doing. And then if you wanted to take it a step further, you could have them do a culminating activity where they would present to their classmates what they did. And I find that presenting is always a really good skill to work on, and a skill that students are kind of always very nervous about. So a lot of these lend themselves well, a lot of these ideas lend themselves well to having students present. Next slide, please. So then we've got group essays, and essay writing is one of those things that I kind of dread teaching and my students kind of dread doing, but I found that by breaking it into a group project, it makes it kind of nice because it's a little bit less daunting, and by assigning specific jobs to every member in a group, the students really get a sense of how much time and effort and work needs to go into writing a paper that earns a really good grade. So I'll assign a group leader to create a doc who then shares it with everyone else, and then I have a list of like student roles that each student should take. So someone works on the introduction, someone works on the body paragraph, another body paragraph, someone does the conclusion, and then someone might do the editing and the proofreading. And so by the end of the class period or class periods that this is taken, everyone kind of understands what their role is, and they really do get a sense of just how much effort needs to go into writing a full essay that comes together coherently and logically and sequentially. I also use kind of a system of checks and balances where I'll have students kind of have their section proofread by the same a group member in another group that has the same role. You can also do this kind of reverse where you sort of jigsaw things and have all the people writing the introduction work together, and then all the people writing the first body paragraph work together, and then send them off to their own individual groups. But there's a lot of flexibility here. I just think the key part is, again, students are collaborating, they're creating, they're a little bit more engaged because they get to do those things. And then if you have them present, which I don't know that I would do that with an essay necessarily, but it kind of motivates them a little bit more. Next slide, please. So these next two are two of my favorite ways to engage students, and two projects that I've done that students have really loved. So the first one is create your own adventure, and if you remember those choose your own adventure books as a kid, this project is kind of along those lines, but obviously you have as much freedom as you want in deciding what to do. I think this works best in Google Slides, and you have to make sure that you learn how to link to another slide within your slides presentation, which is really simple. You just go to insert link and choose slides from this presentation. Those links there in orange will show you how to do that. So there are just two guides there that kind of show you what to do. But again, this is one of those projects that students have to kind of prove their understanding to you. Or they get to be really creative and they get to kind of go off on a tangent. Let's say they learned about a character or a historical figure that they wanted to kind of think about, well, you know, what if he hadn't done this, or what if he had done this instead? This is one of those projects that allows them to explore that. Next slide, please. Then we've got a virtual museum tour, and when I first learned about this, I thought this was the coolest thing in the whole world, and this is something that my kids love doing. So this is awesome for, like, if you're looking for a cross-curricular project. So using Google Slides, the students can use a template that you give them, and actually that picture links to a template, so once you have access to these slides, you'll have the template, just make a copy of it. So students are then able to kind of lead their audience on a tour of, you know, a topic or a theme or whatever it is that you're focusing on. So we were focusing in my class on ancient Egypt. So room 1 was art in Egypt, room 2 was religion, room 3 was the afterlife, and every room kind of gets its own slide, and students can kind of lead the audience around and have different pieces of information that they present. And this is one of those projects that I would definitely suggest having students present for, because they love doing that. They love kind of showing off their work. Next slide, please. Also in Google Slides, we have comic strips. And again, this is another one of those projects that students can be as creative as they want. So this is similar to Choose Your Own Adventure, and that the students kind of have to plan out and craft a story. But I think that planning piece is really crucial, because that shows the teacher that the students really are focusing on the information, and that technology is the tool rather than kind of the focus, that it's really about the learning. So I'll have students kind of do their rough sketch first. They have to submit it for approval, and then they can go into Google Slides and kind of either explain an event that happened, or kind of take an opposing stance, you know, again, like I had said before, well, what if this had happened and not this? So this really taps into that creative piece. Next slide, and then the next three things that we'll talk about, I have to say they're not directly G Suite related, but they're three of the most powerful things I think that you can do in your classroom, so I had to mention them. So first is Genius Hour. So this is basically the idea that comes from Google, that basically Google allowed its engineers to spend 20% of their time to work on any project that they want. They allowed people to work on something that interests them, and productivity will go up. That was kind of their theory. So 50% of Google's projects actually have been created during this creative time, including GChat and Gmail. Post-its also were created during something of a Genius Hour kind of thing. So they're also called passion projects, or 20% time, or moonshot thinking. They have a lot of different names. But this allows students to explore their own passions and encourages creativity in the classroom. And the biggest thing is it really gives students a choice. They are choosing what they want to learn about during a set period of time in school. So it focuses on asking questions about what you want to learn, because we don't ask kids that often, but I think that that's really, really important. And so there's a whole process behind Genius Hour. And these pictures will link to more resources, but it encourages research and collaboration and reaching out to the community to hone their communication and presentation skills, and it just incorporates so many different skills that I think are really important in today's 21st century classroom. So if you have not tried Genius Hour or heard about it, I would definitely recommend doing a little bit more research, because this is something that I think every student should have the opportunity to do. Next slide, please. So again, the last two are kind of not directly Google Drive integrated, but these were kind of the gateway tools that sort of were the jumping off point for leading a lot of teachers at my school to be willing to explore other tools. Kahoot, I'm sure a lot of us are familiar with this, but it's interactive, it's game-based, it's formative assessment tool where students are on a device and they're being asked questions, and they kind of like have to race to see who can answer the question the fastest, and who answers the most correct questions for first place. And so this is like the #1 thing that my students look forward to the most every single day. They ask, can we play? Can we play? And they get so excited to do this. They never get sick of it. And the coolest part is you can actually download the results into Google Drive. You're able to share those results out on Google Classroom. So it is integrated with Google tools, and so G Suite makes it really easy to do Kahoot. Same thing with Genius Hour. You can use a ton of different G Suite tools to do Genius Hour. It just kind of depends what direction you want to go in. Next slide, please. And then finally we have Pear Deck, and this is awesome. I found that sometimes there are just days where you have to kind of do boring lecture and get through that direct instruction kind of stuff, and you don't want to do flipped instruction. So Pear Deck is a formative assessment tool that kind of combines a presentation, so either Google Slides or a PDF or a PowerPoint, with many different kinds of assessment questions. So you can present information and then ask the students immediately after on their device a multiple choice question, or have them type out a short or long answer text question. There are draggables, and there's all these interactive kind of ways that students can answer questions. I will give a heads up, there is a paid version, which I personally think is awesome. I think it's totally worth it. And this also integrates directly with Google Drive. So again, you can download the results, you can push it out to students, and I think that there's power in that, because students can go back and kind of reflect on how they did, and what they might need to work on a little bit more to prepare for either an assessment or the next day in class. Next slide, please. And that is about it. So I know that was a lot. If you have any questions or any ideas, please feel free to reach out to me. You can reach me on Twitter at KennisDanny. You can email me at dannykennis25@gmail.com. You can check out my blog. And if anyone has questions, please feel free to ask, because again, I love being able to talk to other educators.
Hello, this is Amy. So one question, can you insert Google Drawings into Docs, Sheets, Slides, Google Sites, or any other web pages?
Yes, you can, which is one of the coolest parts. I love having kids do that. So I'll have them do a paragraph where they have to write up and explain the summary of an event, and then they can also put a picture kind of like side by side. So yes, absolutely you can.
Oh, okay. And then another, do teachers need to have Gmail to use Google Classrooms?
Yes, you do need Gmail. You have to have a G Suite account, and usually that's through a school domain. So I would recommend talking to your school administrator about that. But yes, you do.
Okay. And then, can you use Google Keep on other platforms besides Chrome, such as Windows or Android?
I know that you can use it on Android. I'm not sure about Windows though.
Okay, something to look at. I think that's it for the questions then. Sarah McGraw did have a comment. Thank you. Awesome presentation.
Oh, thank you. That's so sweet.
Hi, Danny. This is Stephanie. Yeah, that was really informative. I like that you showed, so many different little apps, and whether it's G Suite or other fun things that are not G Suite that you can kind of use. It seems like you've opened up a lot of new ideas for teachers to try out in their classroom. Um, so I think, yeah, with that, we can wrap up. And this has been recorded, so there will be an email going out soon that sends the link. I'll upload the recording to our website. Let me flip back to our slideshow, and we can see the contact information. Here we go. So any further questions, you can feel free to reach out to me, Stephanie, or Danny, and then I'll send an email with this link to ctl.info/webinars. And then another link that will be in the email is this one, and it's great if you want to get a certificate of completion for your school. There's just a very brief survey, and you'll be emailed a PDF certificate of completion. So thanks everybody for taking time out for this, and especially thank you, Danny, for your really great presentation. We really appreciate it. And I think if there's nothing else, we'll close out for today. Anything else to add, Danny?
No, thank you so much for this opportunity. I hope that you guys learned something and took something away. And please, again, feel free to reach out with any questions or comments or ideas.
Yes, and then some of the links in this slideshow too that you mentioned they can look up for more information. I'll make sure that those links would be available to people as well in the outgoing email.
Awesome.
All right, thank you so much, everybody. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.